Hey team, it's Ange here from Equenti Leadership and Learning, coming to you today to talk about the topic of holding space for others in conversation, which is critically important right now. And to be honest, I think it's like possibly one of the most important videos or topics that I've spoken about, maybe ever. Okay, that's how strongly I feel about this. So, something that coaches know how to do, the good ones, is hold space for others in conversations. And what I want to talk to you today about is what exactly that means. What does it mean to hold space? How do we do it? I'm going to offer you some do's and don'ts around holding space. So, when we have someone hold space for us in a conversation, particularly if we're experiencing some emotion or difficulty or big challenge, we want to talk about it, right? When someone holds space for us, we feel heard, we feel acknowledged, we feel accepted, we feel understood, we feel important, valued to you because you're allowing us time and space at a pace that works for us to tell our story and to talk about why that's so important or hurtful or emotional for us right now. And most importantly, especially in the time of COVID-19, it makes us feel connected with, and particularly, for people who are doing this alone, and I'm an example of that, to have someone hold space for us in a conversation is a really just beautiful, heartwarming thing that can really define a friendship or even a professional relationship. So when someone holds space for me, I absolutely know that they're caring about me, okay? When someone doesn't hold space for me in the conversation, I feel dismissed, brushed off, overlooked, not important, not cared for, the opposite of all of those things, okay? I feel like they don't want to take the time to listen to my story. They just want to get to the solution and move on, either so that they can talk about themselves or that they can move on to a happier topic. And that's not respecting the experience, the emotional experience of the person that we're trying to help. Okay. So I want to offer you some do's and don'ts around how to hold space for others in conversations. Now, if you're a coach, you'll know how to do this, and you'll know that it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to be able to deal with your own shit. I'll say that. Deal with the stuff that says, hold on a minute, I want to play a stronger role, a more significant role in this conversation. And when you're able to move through that as a coach, you know that it's not about your significance in the conversation, it's about the client, right? And so some of you may need to learn how to set aside some things that are happening for you, set aside your expectations of the conversation, your priorities, what you need, set aside needing anything from the conversation other than being there for the person that you're trying to help, whether that's a team member or a friend or a family member right now. So some of the things that we do want to do when we're holding space for others in a conversation is to ask open-ended questions. It sounds cliched, I know, but it's questions like, what's happening in your world? What's happening for you right now? What's coming up for you today? What are you feeling at the moment? What's occupying most of your thinking time? What's the one thing that's really just sitting there in the back of your mind? It's always there. They're great questions, conversation starters, and certainly it opens up space for that conversation to occur. The other thing we want to do is be curious. So as the person starts talking to us and telling us about what's going on for them, we want to take almost like a childlike curiosity towards their story and what's happening for them and why it's important, maybe why it's emotional, the impacts for them, the challenges, the opportunities that they see. All of those are great sources of questioning when you're holding space for someone in a conversation. The other essential aspects of holding space, so the do's, are to acknowledge the emotion and accept whatever comes from the person. And by acceptance, I don't necessarily mean to sympathize with it or encourage negative emotion, but it's certainly to empathize with it. It's certainly to be able to stand in their shoes for a moment and imagine what they're going through and what that feels like. Okay. And we always want to acknowledge and name the emotions that we're seeing. So comments like, or responses like, you must feel really sad about that, or I can see that you're really concerned, or that must have really hurt, or that must be a lonely place to be. Yeah. So when we're acknowledging the emotion, we're acknowledging the whole content of the conversation, not just the subject or the topic that's being discussed, but the person's experience of it. And that's often what they're wanting to connect with you around. Some of the don't do's, and man, since I've been coaching, I notice this more and more in people who don't hold space very well. Some of the biggest mistakes and things that I don't want you guys doing right now is immediately connecting the story that the person's telling you to your own story. Oh yes, that happened to me once too, or oh yes, I'm going through the same thing right now. Don't. That brings the attention all the way back onto you, and really this is a conversation of service when we're holding space for others. So that's important to remember. Don't connect it back with your own story, and that can also lead to conversations that feel competitive. Oh yes, but my story is much worse, or my story is much sadder, or more stressful, or whatever it is. And then you get into this competition. It's ridiculous. So that's really about our own needs, and we want to set those aside for the person that we're serving in the conversation. We don't want to offer unsolicited advice or suggestions about how to move forward or how to deal with things. And when we're holding space for others, unless we're explicitly requested and invited to, we don't really want to go into problem-solving mode. Now, this is a very masculine response, not just masculine in men, but women who are in their masculine energy as well will automatically go to problem-solving. And when we're holding space for someone else, it's not about problem-solving. It's about connecting with them, having them feel heard, acknowledged, understood, and we're sharing the experience with them. Okay, so no advice, suggestions, and problem solving unless you're explicitly asked or invited to. We're not going to change the subject when things get uncomfortable. Okay, the fact that someone's having a difficult experience is exactly the reason that they're talking to you. Okay, so if you can't handle the emotion of that conversation, look, that's going to be understandable in some situations right now. What we want to do is just learn to sit with it, learn to sit with that discomfort, because the person's already experiencing it, and changing the subject and not allowing the fullness of that to be expressed will just have them feeling dismissed and not heard and not understood by you. And I'm sure that's not what you're intending to do. And then the final thing we don't want to do is dismiss emotions. By saying, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, or you shouldn't feel stressed, or you shouldn't feel lonely. It's, the best time of our lives right now, and clearly the person's hurting. Okay, so there's some of the things we don't do while we're holding space for others in these critical conversations. It becomes obvious to me immediately within the first few minutes of a conversation whether someone needs me to hold space for them. And in a coaching relationship, I'm always doing that. That's just the mode that I'm in. In friendship or family conversations or other professional conversations, you'll know if someone wants to have space held for them in the conversation by them wanting to disclose or discuss problems or emotionally challenging issues with you. Okay. Of course, if you don't feel prepared, qualified, able, or even in emotionally good enough shape yourself to hold space for that person in a conversation, there's all sorts of things that avenues of referral that you can offer, whether it be to a coach like myself, or a counsellor, or perhaps your employee assistance provider in your company if you're not able to deal with those conversations yourself. But what I'm really encouraging all of you to do now is stretch your comfort zone to be able to create a safe space, a safe container for your staff, for your friends, for your family, for your spouses to really connect with you at a deeper level, and that requires you to hold space in a conversation. So I hope that's been helpful to you. If you're doing some of those things on the don't do list, it might be a bit painful and maybe even made you a bit angry to hear, and that's okay. I'm happy to take your comments on that or take challenge around that. But when we're talking about holding space for others, we need to remember that it's in service to others and not in service to ourselves. All right, I hope that's helpful for you now. Bye.